costuma falhar. Andar com fé eu vou, que a fé não costuma.
Hello, I'm Simon Sadler, Chair of the Department of Design here at UC Davis, and it's my honor to be welcoming you all to the fall 2020 Alberini Family Lecture. As much as we love in-person events, we're thrilled that this virtual format is reaching Aggies across the world and our friends at other universities and organizations. Our speaker this morning is Dr. Lesley-Ann Noel, the Associate Director for Design Thinking for Social Impact and Professor of Practice at the Phyllis M. Taylor Center for Social Innovation and Design Thinking at Tulane University. Her talk this morning could not be more timely. The design community is right now asking whether design has been shaped by colonial outlooks of all sorts, and whether it's possible to decolonize the field. The answer to this is a thrilling, uplifting yes, according to Dr. Noel's research. Drawing on her own positionality as an Afro-Caribbean designer educated in Latin America, Dr. Noel will introduce us to her research into teaching, researching, thinking about and practicing design that can liberate designers and clients and students alike. Central to the work is the emerging philosophy and anthropology of pluriversality, in which we accept that there is no one universal way of understanding the world. So could design become an interchange of multiple viewpoints? The concept of pluriversality is very important at UC Davis, where it was nurtured in the prestigious 2015 Sawyer seminars and drawn together in the 2018 collection co-edited by my distinguished colleague in anthropology, Marisol de la Cadena. Like Dr. Noel's research, pluriversality is a philosophy that has been developed principally in the global south. This is helping unseat the traditional domination of universities and design by Eurocentrism and whiteness. We are so happy to be welcoming Lesley-Ann back to the department. In 2019, she led a workshop with the students of Professor Tom Majorana's class in human-centered design, and she's been speaking with our first-year graduate students this week. Lesley-Ann hails from Trinidad and Tobago and has degrees in industrial design from the Universidade Federal de Paraná in Brazil. She has a master's degree in business administration from the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago, and a PhD in design from North Carolina State University. She's been a teaching fellow at the Stanford D School and is one of the founders of the Pluriversal Research Group within the Design Research Society. And one of the coolest things I've ever learned about a speaker at UC Davis is that Lesley-Ann used to be a backup singer in a reggae band. We're grateful to many colleagues for their work in making this event happen. If I may, a quick shout out to Christina Cogdell, Susan Avila, Christine Teebs, Philip Daly, Patrick O'Reilly, Crystal Masuda, and Michael French, among others. Most important, this speaker series is supported through an endowment by the Carlos and Andrea Alberini Family Foundation, which brings renowned innovators and thinkers in design to campus to inspire students and encourage community engagement and learning. It would be hard to overstate to the Alberini family how meaningful this speaker series is to the intellectual life of our department and its students. Thank you so much. Our next speaker will be on April the 22nd, 2021, when we're joined by Julia Kerner, an acclaimed designer whose work intersects with architecture, product, and industrial and fashion design, including a well-known collaboration with Ruth Carter on the costumes for the movie Black Panther. Please look out for details as they become available and join us again then. Today's lecture will be followed by a Q&A, to which we warmly invite you by writing questions in the box on Zoom, which I think is at the bottom somewhere there, during and after Professor Noel's talk. And with that, I'll turn proceedings over to Lesley-Ann.
All right. Thank you so much, Simon. That was a very interesting welcome. And I would like to really thank UC Davis Department of Design for this invitation. Definitely, I'd like to thank the Alberini family as well for their support for this venture. And I'm excited. UC Davis is an interesting place. It's close to my heart. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And so I'm happy to be here, and I'm very nervous actually, but I'm sure I'll be fine. So good afternoon from my part of the world. We're here to talk about pluriversality in design. Envisioning Pluriversal Design is the name of this talk. And actually, we won't have enough time. I'm sure already that we're going to run out of time because it's really an exciting conversation that I've tried to organize into like 4 different chapters. So I'll start off. So we're going to do 4 different chapters. The first one is going to start with positionality, where I'm talking about my worldview and stuff like that. Why do I even think I can talk about this? The second one, I'm going to invite you to decolonize your bookshelf a little bit. And in the third section, I'm talking about pluriversal ways of knowing and doing. And then the fourth section is envisioning a pluriversal design education. So it's like there'll be 4 distinct mini talks within this talk. So I'm going to jump right into it. So the first chapter of my talk, we could call my origin story. As I said earlier, why do I think I need to talk about pluriversal design? And I'd like to give you an insight into my world. I'm from the Caribbean, as Simon said. And though I'm from a very small island, it's actually impossible to fit my world into one single view of the globe. So here's a glimpse of a major part of my world. It's the Americas. I'm from a tiny island that barely appears on most world maps, Trinidad and Tobago. And being from this tiny place may have actually made me very open to exploring the world. I spent many years in Brazil in between 2 cities, Salvador Bahia in the northeast and Curitiba in the south. My mother is from Jamaica, and there are some other places in the Caribbean that are significant to me, like Guyana and Suriname. And I've worked on other islands in the Caribbean. And in 2015, I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, and now I'm chatting with you. Well, I moved to California as well for a year, and now I am chatting with you from New Orleans. All right, I see that I'm giving a little bit of feedback. I'll try harder with that. But my worldview is broader than the Americas, so here's a bit more. As a person from the African diaspora, Africa is significant to me. I've been able to live and work in a few places on the continent, such as Mozambique, Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya. And Ghana is also close to my heart. And even further away, I have colleagues at different campuses of the National Institute of Design in India, who I'm probably WhatsApping during any given week. Some of my relationships with people from other places are accidental, while others are intentional, but all of these experiences have led me to have a keen understanding and interest in how other people go about their lives in other parts of the world. So I started everything with positionality. I grew up in Trinidad in the 1970s in a Black middle-class family with feminist, progressive, and socially conscious parents who embodied Black power values and social justice values. They were quiet activists, but activists nonetheless. As children, my siblings and I went with them to marches, protests, political rallies, and we had examples of Black hope, Black love, Black happiness. I was aware of my Blackness in my life in Trinidad, but in a very different way to the way that I am made aware of it in my life in the US today. I've been attached to way too many universities over a period of almost 30 years with several starts and stops along the way. I've started programs, transferred from programs, dropped out of a few things, but I actually managed to finish industrial design at UFIPE in Curitiba, an MBA in Trinidad, and a PhD at NC State, where I focused on doing design with through a critical lens. And today, as I mentioned earlier, I'm at New Orleans in the Gulf South at Tulane University. But I want to go back for a moment to my graduation photo in Brazil in 1997, 1998. And even though it was so long ago, this experience of living in Brazil in the 90s laid the foundation for my design philosophy and practice. I lived with sociology and anthropology majors in both cities, Salvador and Curitiba. Paulo Freire, Claude Levi-Strauss, and Sigmund Freud were featured in our dinner table conversations, as well as discussions about power and social justice. I would say I became an anthropologist and psychologist by osmosis, starting with those experiences in Brazil in the 90s. We were politically engaged. Student protests played a major role in the impeachment of Fernando Collor de Mello in 1992, and unbeknownst to my parents back home, I went to those protests. So I'll say I took part in that. My colleagues introduced me to the PT, or the Workers' Party, of which Lula was the head. And I lived in the building next to the student government at UFPE, which meant that I was always close by when students wanted to protest anything. And protest very often turns into party and a place for meeting people, etc. Those interests in power, social justice, and anthropology and psychology have followed me throughout my career as a product designer in development projects, as an educator, and as a researcher. And during the period that I worked in international development, I struggled with the power imbalances in the work that I was doing as a local designer working with foreign helicopter designers, as well as when I myself occupied that helicopter role. And when I say helicopter, it means the designer who just flies in and does something and leaves. So I question the structures, processes, and even the impact of some of the projects that I worked on, and had to learn to live with that guilt and tension in the work. Later on in my PhD, I was able to legitimize my interest in power, social justice, anthropology, psychology, and multiculturalism by finally doing reading and coursework in relevant areas. So along the way, I was introduced to emancipatory research and critical theory, and decided that this is the way that I wanted to practice design, through a critical and emancipatory lens. Even though I operate in the fields of design and design thinking, from time to time I step back, step away, and I say, hold on, let me create some distance. My approach is critical and emancipatory, which is my way of trying to distance myself from the work, as well as me trying to wrestle with the tension of the damage that some of the work that we do does. So what do I mean though when I say this, that my work is emancipatory? Emancipatory research aims to create emancipation and social justice, to correct the power imbalance in research design between privileged researchers and their research subjects from traditionally marginalized or oppressed groups, such as the economically disadvantaged. And it aims to shift power, redistribute power, share power. And some key words related to emancipatory research, related to its ontology, epistemology, and methodologies, are that there is the analysis of power inequities in this work, that it is created through a prism of cultural lenses, that knowledge is not only created by the elite researcher, that there are multiple truths, that it is dialogic and dialectical, it shifts power to those without power, it is participatory and political, and it is linked to social action. And I often show this West African proverb when I'm talking about emancipatory research to make it a little easier for people to understand. Until the lion has his or her own storyteller, the hunter will always have the best part of the story. So in the work that I'm doing, I'm trying to find the story that is not often told. I'm trying to do my work. I'm trying to ask questions like, what is the lion's story? How can I understand the lion better? How can I get the lion to tell their own story? And when I say I'm practicing design or design thinking through a critical lens, this means that I'm questioning everything. I'm pulling the criticality from a few different directions. Critical thinking, which is about many things, including questioning sources, ideas, and assumptions. Critical inquiry and critical theory, which are about doubting and questioning what has been taken for granted and demonstrating that we don't know what we think we know. Critical pedagogy, a way of teaching that is grounded in dialogue, situated learning and encouraging students to see and examine power structures, as well as to question the knowledge that is presented to them, and for them to co-create new knowledge with others. And finally, critique, which we do pretty well in art and design, where we reflect on the feedback that is given to us and think about how to make things better. So the thread that runs through all of it is question everything. So my critical design practice is based on questioning and reflection. So I've just introduced myself, and I know some people were introducing themselves earlier on in the chat, but I would love if you could just put in the chat, where are you joining us from? And maybe even, is it good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night? So I'll give you all a few minutes so I can see people saying in the chat where they're joining us from. All right, lots of California people. Arizona, California. I know I saw some Puerto Rico people earlier on, Tusker. All right, lots and lots of people. And it's exciting to see all of these different places. I will actually go back into the chat and see where people are from. So moving on to story number 2. So this mini story, in this next section, I would like to introduce you to a few authors that have helped me broaden the way that I think about design. We come to decoloniality from different places, and you've heard me say many times already that I'm from a small island in the English-speaking Caribbean, and I grew up in a space and a time where people were attempting to lessen the impact and influence of colonial powers. In our case, this was Britain. And so we were creating new relationships, new flows of information, and new sources of information. So in my view, decoloniality is a process that doesn't stop. And it's a philosophy to guide what we do. And yes, it's continuous. When I was living in Brazil, Brazil had been a republic for so long that it's a different kind of talk when we talk about decolonization in that context. But being in South America brought me closer to more radical discourses and liberatory thinking about revolution and power, as well as continuing the discussion about delinking ideas and theory from Eurocentrism. I want to give you a peek at some of the books on the bookshelf that I've been reading about decoloniality and pluriversality. But first, I'll start with a little quote by Mignolo and Walsh, that decoloniality is an ongoing serpentine movement, towards possibilities of other modes of being, thinking, knowing, sensing, and living. And this understanding, or seeking this understanding of multiple modes of being, thinking, knowing, and sensing and living has been a focus of the way that I teach today in my attempt to make the work that I do more decolonial. And so the first book that I'm going to share is Designs for the Pluriverse. The title of this talk includes the word pluriversality, and we can't talk about pluriversality in design without referring to Designs for the Pluriverse by Arturo Escobar. And pluriverse means the world as conceived according to a theory of pluralism, and according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary. I went to my first international design conference in 2012, and I've been to many since then. By the time I heard Arturo Escobar give a presentation on pluriversality at the Design Research Society conference in 2018, I had already decided that people from the global north and the global south were interested in very different things. And I could see this in the way that people presented their research. Escobar seemed to be talking directly to me when he highlighted that just what I had seen, that research issues in the global north seem to focus on social innovation, transition, and ontology, among other areas, while research issues from the global south seem to focus on issues related to decoloniality, design methods from the south, alternative design practices, and autonomous design that is co-developed by people who are not designers. And Escobar was talking about a very specific context. He wasn't talking about all design, but it was interesting for me to hear that distinction, which I had already been thinking that I was seeing. So Escobar's book introduced me to ideas about what design could look like from a different epistemology or worldview. In my own practice as a designer and educator, I had already started to question the dominant Euro-American hegemony in design, but Escobar helped me to articulate some of these questions a little bit more clearly. He proposes a reorientation of design from functionalist, rationalistic, and industrial traditions towards a type of rationality and set of practices attuned to the relational dimension of life. And he also writes about the constitution of a field of design for, by, and from the Global South is thus a very welcome and timely call for two main reasons. First, because much of what goes on in the banner of design in the Global North is not appropriate for design in the South, and increasingly inappropriate to a North in crisis as well. And second, because there is a great potential in design's reorientation to serve a range of theoretical and political projects in the South. From Escobar, I moved on to Boaventura de Souza Santos, who my good friend Renata Marx Leitão introduced me to. And in Epistemologies of the South, this book aims to depart from Western-centric critical tradition. And the three basic ideas that underlie this book are, first, the understanding of the world by far exceeds the Western understanding of the world. Second, there is no global social justice without global cognitive justice. And third, the emancipatory transformations in the world may follow grammars and scripts other than those developed by Western-centric critical theory, and such diversity should be valued. Souza talks about epistemic violence that is committed against knowledge from the Global South, a form of violence that if I personalize the thought, I would have to say, I know, like so many other people from the Global South know, where our knowledge is so often questioned in the Global North because of differences in accent, skin color, worldview, or because we did not attend a North American Ivy League school. Santos advocates learning from the South through an epistemology of the South. And even before I read Escobar and Santos, there was Freire, Paulo Freire, who joined us, in our minds at least, as students at dinner at my college dorm. So Pedagogy of the Oppressed, in my opinion, should be mandatory reading for every design educator. It is about education as the practice of freedom, as a contrast to education where we deposit knowledge into people's heads and students' minds. And Freire teaches us about the relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed and how oppression dehumanizes both parties. And here are some significant quotes from Pedagogy of the Oppressed. One cannot expect positive results from an educational or political action program which fails to respect the particular view of the world held by the people. Such a program constitutes cultural invasion, good intentions notwithstanding. No pedagogy which is truly liberating can remain distant from the oppressed by treating them as unfortunates and by presenting for their emulation models from among the oppressors. The oppressed must be their own example in the struggle for their redemption. But one does not liberate someone by alienating them. Authentic liberation, the process of humanization, is not another deposit to be made in a person. Liberation is a praxis, action and reflection upon the world in order to transform it. Those truly committed to the cause of liberation can accept neither the mechanistic concept of consciousness as an empty vessel to be filled, nor the use of banking pedagogical methods of domination, propaganda, slogans, deposits in the name of liberation. And these words and ideas are important for us as designers to understand the need for listening, understanding, collaboration, and co-creation in our design work, and for creating dialogic and reflective educational experiences for those of us in education. Simon mentioned that I co-organize a group called the Pluriversal Design Special Interest Group. And then we have a book club on some Fridays. So I must also credit my colleagues from the book club, Renata Marx-Leitão and Frederick Van Amstel in particular, for expanding my interpretation of the works of Escobar, Santos, and Freire in our book club discussions. And here are some images of some other books that are on my to-read list, or that I've read recently, or that are on our book club list. And I can't go through all of them, of course, but maybe some of you will join us for book club sometime. It's a wide range of reading. It consists of Latin American decolonial scholars, Caribbean decolonial scholars, and also I've been increasingly interested in Afrofuturism and people who are writing about utopia. So you'll see also Octavia Butler is on that list, Adrienne Marie Brown. And I didn't mention Bell Hooks as well, who's someone that we can be reading to broaden the way that we think about this. So another little question for the chat that I will have to go back in to really see what's on your pluriversal bookshelf. So share in the chat some books that you think that other designers really need to be reading to expand their worldview, to understand liberation, emancipation, freedom, any books that you want us to read that you found in the work that you're doing. So I'll give you all just a moment to do that. Okay, yes, design justice, decolonizing methodologies, Escobar, We Keep Us Safe. That one I don't know. I will look it up. The Body is Not an Apology. It is in my cart in an online bookstore. A Billion Black Anthropocenes. Andy Warhol. I've never read Andy Warhol actually, so I'll look that up. Orientalism by Edward Said. Tony Fry has many articles that we should read. So yes, so thank you everyone for helping us to expand our bookshelf. And I know that the text, the chat, I believe is going to also be made available, but even if it isn't, I'm going to mine the chat and find these references that you all are referring to. And great, somebody put in Stuart Hall, and I actually did not refer to Stuart Hall, but he's on the bookshelf, and I'm gonna come back to Stuart Hall in the last talk. So we come to talk number 3, right? Which is pluriversal ways of knowing and doing. And in this one, we're trying to see how do we move from theory to practice? Because yes, we read all of these things, we have all of these revolutionary ideas, but people then want to know, okay, what does this actually look like in practice? And so that's what this section is about. So I did 2 small focus groups with Black students at a predominantly white institution. And these students shared with me that they thought the design classes loved Black culture, but not Black people, and were full of white saviorism and required forced assimilation. They didn't hold back. They complained about the assumptions of sameness that would start with an anecdote like, remember when we all played rock, paper, scissors? Or, you know that red wagon that everyone used to take to the beach? And they talked about how these examples made them feel invisible and isolated. And I only did this focus group with Black students, but I am sure that there are other groups of students who would experience that kind of invisibility or isolation in the design curriculum. I knew firsthand how these students felt from my own experiences after moving to the States in 2015 and often being the only Black person in the room. After some reflection on their feedback, as well as on reflection on feedback from another student of color in a Design for Social Impact class, I've been very intentional since then about how I create my classes and design experiences going forward. So in this section of our journey, I'd like to share some examples of pluriversal, decolonial, anti-racist, anti-hegemonic design classes. And yes, I've used all of those words Because sometimes the pluriversal class looks like the anti-racist class, which looks like the class about power. And perhaps the thread that runs through these experiments is that I'm intentionally creating a space where multiple perspectives are welcomed and heard. As I started this talk with positionality, I start every class and project with discussions about positionality. My students from minoritized backgrounds shouldn't have to be the only ones to think about identity. So this space to talk about identity is created, and we use this diagram on mural to help us map who we are. And we do it in, students turn off their cursor, so we don't see who's putting in their information. But afterwards, we talk a little bit about who we are and the project area that we're looking at, so that we can see where there is some heterogeneity and some homogeneity in our group, and how does that impact the project that we're working on. I'm gonna move right along to another project. This class that I like to share, we called it Designer, Insider, Outsider, and I created this class with my friend Glenn Fajardo. Glenn and I actually had the name for the class as Solving First World Problems, because we were trying to, we wanted to play with what very often happens in design development classes. So I overheard a colleague say about a design class with an international collaboration. We only work in developing countries. We can't solve our own problems in such a short space of time. Our problems are too complex to correct in that space. And as a response to that comment, Glenn and I created this class where we wanted to flip the direction of the design collaboration. What sometimes happens in international design for social impact classes is that you have people from the global north going into the global south to save them. And we wanted to change that. And so we shifted the direction, and we planned a class where the power would lie with the students from the global south. I approached the business school at the University of the West Indies, my former employers in Trinidad, and the Trinidadian students became the ones to make an analysis of the problem of the students in Silicon Valley. We created an entire scenario where students from Trinidad were hired as consultants to study students from the Nasirema ethnic group in the Valle del Siliconio, starting our class with a reference to the anthropology essay, The Body Rituals of the Nasirema by Robert Minor. And this class focused on ethnography and reflection. Here's the reflection of one of the students at the end of the class. It's difficult to have outsiders coming in and scrutinizing your culture. While they come with the best of intentions, they're there to solve the problems. Sometimes I wanted to hide the problem because I only wanted to show them the best side of California culture. Throughout the course of the 2 weekends, my perspective on international collaborations changed because I thought it was going to be really difficult to connect across cultures. Once we hit our stride as a team, it didn't make a big difference who was insider and who was outsider. So we never moved into project or product development phase because we really wanted to focus on that reflective moment and see where that light bulb went on for the students and they started to question things. Another class that I did, this was actually the workshop that I did at in Tom Iorana's class. This class was created directly, again, as a response to the focus groups with Black students. And this was about using design thinking methods to promote critical conversations among selected user groups. In the brief, I used an image from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse because I think it is the ultimate pluriversal superhero story. There are so many perspectives in that story. In that class, I challenged people to create an object, an experience, a game, or a recipe that would help them have conversations that were difficult but necessary around social problems. So I really have to thank Tom again for this invitation, because this was really an exciting experience. And students in the UC Davis prototype, they created in about 30 minutes, they created a game called Cards Against Oppression, where they got us to talk about things like redlining and how we all benefit from gentrification, even though we say that we hate gentrification. They also created a recipe to tell your grandmother about your new gender identity. And this next image, this just shows you some of the brainstorming processes that students go through in this class, where they think about the recipe and they suggest things like 2 pounds of empathy, 2 teaspoons of self-awareness, 3 2/3 cups of compassion, and other interesting experiences. And so I created the Designer's Critical Alphabet as a result of my my time in California. I created it while I was in California because my experience in California really opened my eyes to issues around equity, both in my position, as I said earlier, as often the only Black person in the room, and as my position as an outsider. And some of the conversations that I was eavesdropping on in Silicon Valley highlighted the dangers, maybe an extreme word for me, but the dangers of having non-diverse teams or teams with limited perspectives design everything for us. And of course, I'm not the only person who has written about this, and other people have written about this in their research and in their work. Several factors led to the development of the Designer's Critical Alphabet. And one factor was that it was a way to create, for me, to gently nudge projects in different directions. My idea was that as I listened to the conversations, I could drop a card on the table to nudge the design team in a way that, in a direction that was totally new, as I noted blind spots about critical theory, pedagogy, identity, and inclusivity. I was a bit intimidated by the idea of giving rich students, maybe rich white students, as a Black foreigner, as a person from the outside. I was intimidated by giving these students feedback, negative feedback on their design projects. So I felt that doing it in this kind of way could be a way of me giving feedback from a distance. And I was also trying to think how to make critical theory language accessible to designers and non-PhD folks, and how to remind designers to ask about multiple questions or remember multiple perspectives as they worked. And these cards actually also have a special connection to UC Davis. Since I created the Etsy listing, which still exists today, I only actually created that listing so that Jim Hausfeld could get a set of these cards after I left California. So I have to publicly thank Jim for helping me to get these cards out there, despite my own imposter syndrome, and as well as questions about the usefulness of the cards from other doubting folks. And actually, there's an animation of the app, because there is now an app in testing for this product, and some people at work using it. All right, and another project that I would like to share is Hello from the Pluriverse. This is a project that isn't so public, so I'm making it public now, right? This is a project that I've been working on for about the last year and a half. And it is, yes, Hello from the Pluriverse. And in the first semester of this project, my students, I invited my students, I didn't invite them, they had to do it for grades, but I'll say I invited my students to interview ordinary designers all around the world. I found the designers and asked them if they would agree to be interviewed. And in particular, designers from the Global South or designers from minoritized backgrounds. And my students just had to have a conversation with them and ask them 3 simple questions. We collected about 30-something interviews in the first semester. And now we are using these interviews as a new form of textbook where the current students listen to the interviews and reflect on their own design process and compare and contrast the positions of the different designers with their own processes. So students have also written essays about these interviews that they've conducted, and we intend to share these via a podcast and a publication. So here is the essay about Alfredo Gutierrez Borrero, who is a Colombian designer, and he is, this essay was written by Isabel Anderson. And here is the essay about Tanya Tanya Marie Williams' Rule, a Trinidadian designer, and the essay was written by Callie Baker. And, so I very often, say that I don't use the canon in the work that I'm doing, because I think that we can co-create knowledge as we move forward. And so that's what this Hello from the Pluriverse project is about. How can we then talk to designers in different places about the way they work, and then how can we analyze that and talk about design processes afterwards. And the last little experiment that I'm going to share is design thinking as curry, which is about flexibility in the way we talk about design and design thinking. So in my class, I don't like to talk about branded design thinking processes, or at least what I call branded design thinking processes. I do like, however, to talk about design thinking as curry. In my analogy, I say some people need recipes, and some people learn to improvise with ingredients. They learn to experiment with ingredients. And so when you're learning to cook something like a curry, you follow this recipe faithfully, probably at first, or you're looking at somebody else and watching how they cook. However, when you've mastered the ingredients, maybe we actually stop using recipes. Or in the case of design thinking, we stop following the scripted design processes that we've learned, because by now we get these ingredients. So the ingredients in good design thinking might be, and notice I say might because nothing is absolute in this kind of, when you have this kind of worldview, nothing is absolute. So the good ingredients might be empathy, flexibility, relevance, critical awareness, finding patterns, multidisciplinarity, a focus on the future, optimism, openness, stick-to-itiveness, creativity, and a few dashes of cool to make it special. And we use the ingredients in different ways according to the context that we're in. So I'm from a place where we eat lots of curry. And every time I talk about this metaphor, I realize that other people are from lots of places in the world where they also eat lots of curry. So people often reach out to me to connect with me because they see themselves in this description of design and design thinking. So we're nearly there. We're at the last one. All right, so envisioning a pluriversal design education. And in this little very tiny talk, because now I'm looking at the clock, right? I'm sharing a thought experiment that I've had for several years. It started with a paper from 2012 by a well-known design researcher who affirmed that since most design professions involve shaping goods and services within large industrial economies, this political context is one of the key realities of design education today and tomorrow. I probably didn't even get to finish the article because I was just stuck at that connection between design practice and large industrial economies. And I thought, but I'm actually not from a large industrial country, but I'm a designer and I've been a designer for 20 plus years. What am I doing here? So I started this thought experiment, as I mentioned. Before I get there, I'm finally going to refer to Stuart Hall, another Caribbean thinker, because today, I think that there's a lot of discussion about the future of design, design education. And in my reading of Stuart Hall, who I didn't refer to earlier on the bookshelf, right, I found one article that talks about the impossibility of a global cultural studies in an international frame. And the title of that article stuck with me because I wonder if we're not in a space where there is an impossibility of a global design curriculum. And if we talk about the future of design education, maybe we need to talk about the futures of design education, because there can't be one future. So I've explored several variations of design curricula that are not inspired by the Bauhaus or Ulm. And I'll share some of these images here. So in this first slide, this was the curriculum that I developed thinking about that article about design outside of a large industrial context, where I was trying to think, well, what are the concerns of people in landlocked developing countries, least developing countries, and small island developing states? And I'm from a small island developing state. And so here I was trying to think, okay, what are the core things that we're trying to do in design? And then what are some of the social sciences, I guess, connections that we need to make to do our work well? And then finally, in the green outer ring, what are some of the constraints of people who are living in these contexts? Because I really wanted to demonstrate and make this case that design is not only for large industrialized contexts. And another curriculum experiment that I've made is about critical and empowering design education. And this actually grounds, my students don't see this in the course outline, but this grounds the way that I teach, where I am drawing on critical utopian action research, which is around these three simple questions: what is wrong, where do we want to go, and how will we get there? And then I've also added Ira Shaw's principles of empowering education in the outer ring, that education must be participatory, effective, problem-posing, situated, multicultural, dialogic, desocializing, democratic, researching, interdisciplinary, and activist. And so as I said, I do use this intuitively now in all of the work that I do. The third image that that I'm showing you is about a design curriculum that is not focused on outcomes. It is focused on building mindsets. So it's a design curriculum around 21st century skills that can be cultivated through design pedagogy, such as flexibility, empathy, creativity, facilitation, grit, collaboration, problem solving, resourcefulness, resilience, experimentation, comfort with discomfort, future focus, curiosity, and openness. And I did this one actually very early in my PhD work. So this also influences the way I think about design. I actually move very often between teaching designers and non-designers. But when I'm teaching non-designers, I am thinking about what are the skills that we're trying to create as we teach these classes. Then this, my decolonial, my pluriversal design syllabus draws on principles from decolonial literature, and in particular, Boaventura de Souza Santos, to create principles for a pluriversal design syllabus. And though I'm using Escobar's term, I used different literature. So I focus much more on Santos's work. And this curriculum emphasizes responsive design practice, radical decoloniality, critical making, resilience and change, knowledge as emancipation, critical utopias and dystopias, community as educator, and learning oppression, understanding our worlds, intentional listening and seeing, and critical design thinking, localization and globalization, anti-hegemonic knowledge, and non-Western worlds. And in this image, I was thinking of a Pan-African design syllabus. And I created this as a response to the violence and racial unrest in the United States, as a response to the murder of George Floyd. But I have wondered for several years about how a social design curriculum would look through an emancipatory and liberatory lens created by Black and Brown people for Black and Brown audiences. So in this image, I am looking at courses like Imagining Black Futures, Narrative and Storytelling, Serving My Community, Constructive Heritage, Positionality Matters, Resilience and Change, Wellness and the African Experience, Challenging Stereotypes, Pan-African Ethnography, Africans and the Environment, Liberatory Design and Making, and Ancient and Modern Technologies. And in this final image, which is a little bit illegible, but I'll explain the context behind this image. I shared the previous images with other people at the Pivot Design Conference at Tulane in June, and I asked the members of the audience to share with me what would they imagine in their own version of the pluriversal design syllabus, because nothing has to be the way that it was. Okay, so like I did for them, I want to ask you, what are some of the things that we could be imagining in a new pluriversal design syllabus? Here are some of the topics. I'm not going to go into all of the courses, but the big themes that came up were spiritual design, critical making, decoloniality and liberation, social sciences, good and social design, critical history, metacognition, pluriversality, and then design practice in general. So I am asking you what's on your pluriversal design syllabus. And so again, I'm asking you to throw it into the chat and tell us what are some of the things that you are imagining in your curriculum as we move forward. This is how we do this. You know, we co-design things. And so at this point, I am going to come to a close while you put some of your suggestions for new courses into the chat. I'm making you this invitation to challenge the ideas of what design is or what design should be. And I'm asking you to consider what is important from your own perspective and positionality for pluriversal design education. So please share with us. Stay in touch. I'm very, very reachable and I'm responsive. And then my Zoom art, I came with 3 wonderful Black women to this presentation, but my art was created by a Barbadian artist called Sheena Rose, who I invite you all to look up on Instagram. And I'm gonna stop sharing there. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Hi, Lesley-Ann. Can you see me?
Yes, I can see you.
Well, I mean, the chat is on fire, and that was absolutely outstanding. Thank you so, so much. I know everybody is gonna want to thank you from the bottom of their hearts for that. So you're willing, I believe, to take some questions and answers?
Yes.
Can I then do a little bit of housekeeping before we start? Just want to thank as well, there's a couple of design MFA students, Trace Manuel and Fatima Mustafa, who are helping us in the background, try to figure out where to begin, because there's so many questions and comments. I know you're a bit of an expert at scanning the column, but can I also suggest to people that as well as have us do the scan of the chat, can you be posting, if you've got a specific question, can you use that Q&A tool? I think that will help us streamline things and make sure that we are getting to the questions. Now, can we start with this one? Lesley-Ann, and we got a question. I got a question yesterday by email in anticipation of the talk, and this was from Robert C. Bolt and Sybil Betancourt from the Center for Design Thinking and Innovation in Education. And they wrote saying, we are using design thinking in Puerto Rican high schools to create a shared language across classrooms and to catalyze student and teacher engagement. How might pluriversal design be applied to help shape our efforts in the diverse and colonial environment that is Puerto Rico? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing I maybe should say is that, like, pluriversal design, I hope, is not a thing. You know, it's not like one thing. It's working in a way that is affected by a certain philosophy and worldview. And so, you know, I don't want people to think that there's some steps that they need to follow for this to become pluriversal design. And so when I think about that question, I think that in a place like Puerto Rico, and another island in the Caribbean, I would be very mindful. I think the co-creation of design and design thinking is fantastic. And I would be very mindful about how to introduce the knowledge and the processes, because when you are from an island, you very easily think that knowledge comes from outside. So like when I was doing, for my PhD work, I did some design thinking work with fourth graders. I never mentioned the word design thinking or design. I never showed them any image and saying, well, this is the process that we're going to go through. And the work that I was doing, of course, was grounded in Freire. But we talked about what the processes we were doing were, and then I asked the students to draw it so that the knowledge came from them rather than the knowledge coming from me or the knowledge coming from this invisible outsider person. Because, you know, that's what colonialism does to you. It makes you doubt your own ability to produce knowledge and things like that. So, you know, that's one care that I would take if I were working in that kind of context, you know, to make sure that it is about co-creating knowledge and not presenting design or design thinking in a very dogmatic way, saying that this is the way we do things. And just, and another thing, I guess, is that framework that I like to use, that I refer to so often, critical utopian action research, is a framework that I think works very well, where you help people to move into the space of creating knowledge, where you're asking them to dream about this future that they're hoping for, which is sometimes difficult, you know, but by taking that future that they're hoping for, then you can use that to build into the knowledge. So it might be a little bit off the answer to refer to critical utopian action research, but I just think it's important to make sure that in doing the work, the organizers are making spaces for many different perspectives, and they are ensuring that the participants know that they are also able to create knowledge in the work that they do.
That's wonderful. In a moment, I don't know how you as good as multitasking as you are doing this subject, I don't know. You might want to take a look at the Q&A with me and see if you want to pull things out. But I do have another question, if I can, that I intercepted from the chat as it streamed through. And this is actually from Marisol de la Cadena, who, as you know, is you know, one of the leading thinkers in pluriversality. And you know, Lesley-Ann, you set this up, you showed us the curry, and you've blown everyone's minds, and we're going to be thinking about curry now every time we try and design. But Marisol hooks onto that analogy as well. Now, this might be a little abstract, but I think it really gets to one of the core sort of dilemmas of the discipline. And Marisol simply wrote, curry unclassifies. Can design unclassify? Or rather, can it work with the unclassified? So this is Marisol coming from outside the discipline. Yeah. Looking at us. What do you think?
So I actually have not met Marisol, but I was afraid that she would ask a difficult question because I know she's at UC Davis. So I have a few answers, which are not answers, you know, maybe they're questions, right? Like recently in our book club, Fred Van Amstel reminded us, we don't have to answer questions all the time. You know, we are also, a Freirean approach is about posing problems. So our job is to ask questions. It's not always to answer questions. And that's a little bit of a tension in what we do as designers. And can design unclassify? I think yes. And even though I talk, I'm interested in decoloniality and pluriversality and anti-hegemony and all of that, there are days that I have to recognize I am I was educated in this tradition, and therefore I am just as colonizing as everyone else. You know, it is inherently the work that we do as designers that I guess sets us up to work like this. And I know another researcher recently put out something on Twitter. I believe it was Ahmed Ansari, who said that when we finally, and I'm completely paraphrasing, I might botch it all, but it's what stuck with me. It's like when we finally reach the space of decolonizing design, maybe what we're doing won't be design at all. So, you know, like I've been through a bit of an existential crisis in some cases, and I'm sure many other designers go through that kind of existential crisis where we want to work in different ways, but the way we were taught to work is in fact this kind of top-down approach, is in fact to value elite design knowledge over what is non-elite in quotes, and to create, you know, put certain designers upon pedestals. And it really, there is a space, or there's a need for many of us to challenge that kind of design practice. So I can share what I do, where I'm intentionally trying to challenge that. And I'm having little boxing matches in my head all the time where I'm thinking, okay, is this person a designer or not? I'll actually share one anecdote that came out of the work that I was doing with children in Trinidad, where, as I said in the presentation, I didn't talk about design thinking and design processes, but we talked about what we were doing when we were creating and when we were responding to a need that we heard people, you know, we identified needs that people had, and then we responded to that creatively. And then I asked the children if they knew other people who work like this. I probably did by this point say, okay, and this is what we do as designers. And then I asked the children, who do you know who does this kind of work? And then they said, well, the welder does this because the welder knows that we need protection at home, and then the welder makes those burglar bars for our houses. And then the nail technician does this because the nail technician understands that we like pretty things and we need this beauty on our fingernails. And so the nail technician is also a designer. And the hairdresser is also a designer because the hairdresser understands the needs that we have. And so, you know, I thought, oh my God, that is fantastic. And then also I immediately went into my crisis, chaos kind of mode. I'm like, oh my God, but if everyone thinks that all of these people are designers, what does it mean for us? You know, so I do think that we will have that tension, and that tension is good. And I don't have a response to Marisol's question, but it is something that I think about all the time.
No, I think that's great. So you're saying, you know, we have to live right with that tension. So yes. That I guess it's on us to be constantly sort of asking ourselves, you know, what is my role here? I'm showing up, I'm doing what?
Yeah.
You know, this is one of the most fascinating kind of like existential crises about the discipline that I can recall. Sometimes I sort of think, oh, it's a little bit like sustainability. Like 20 years ago, I was mentored by somebody called Pauline Madge, who was one of the first people to sort of say, you know, design, it drives consumption. It's not clear that it can be sustainable, that it might actually be part of the problem as much as it can be part of the solution. And it reminds me of how when this call to decolonizing design, that part of our discipline is to furnish expertise to people. But that sort of arrival, like, yeah, I'm a designer, I've got solutions. It's really delicate.
Yes. I think how I've dealt with that a little bit is I challenge myself and I try to set up projects where we can get expertise from different directions. I'm not actually the person who will completely discard design knowledge, because I also know, you know, now that I'm in this design thinking space, whatever that is. I also know the frustration of projects not finishing because maybe the person with, there is some expertise that some of us bring as designers. You know, some of us might have already been de-skilled and maybe we don't have the expertise anymore. But, you know, that focus on finishing things sometimes is in fact required to get something done. And, you know, so it's like, so that's part of my own existential crisis, that I know that I am in fact, yes, focusing on maybe less consumption, but focusing on going through a process. And I am in fact sometimes creating a little bit of a hierarchy between one type of design knowledge and another type of design knowledge. But I'm really trying to then make sure that there is a space for collaboration, and that everyone recognizes that they have something to contribute to the work that we're doing.
So I just want to remind everybody as well, you can see it in the chat as well, you know, truly, right, the talk this morning kind of pushes open the doors to really another world. It's a lot to take in, and we will try and post a recording of the lecture this morning. And also we have a graphic writer who will be helping map the concepts that we've been learning about this morning, and we will provide that as well, so that, you know, this conversation and what we're figuring out here will carry on after this morning and for the rest of our lives, I think.
Yes, I have a question that I do want to respond to.
Please do.
I just saw Hudari Davis's question: for whose gaze is anti-colonial design? And that's a really good question. If these designs for emancipation of the global South, isn't it best to maintain their fugitivity even within the academy? Yes, and so the whose gaze is a good question, because again, so a lot of what I'm doing and what I talk about is me kind of publicly challenging myself to do certain things, right? And I, at some point, realized that when I taught when I taught students in Trinidad, or when I taught students of color in the US, I taught one type of design class, and then I taught a different type of design class when I was teaching in a PWI or in a different type of context. And then that had me thinking a little bit about the gaze, you know, and I actually saw it as well in my colleagues, where maybe we were teaching a specific type of class for a Eurocentric gaze. And the work that I am doing now still ends up, right now has ended up, I guess, in a more public space, but I am in fact holding myself accountable, and then therefore doing the work for a non-Eurocentric gaze. So in the class that I teach at Tulane, we have two community partners who are two women of color, who I am checking in with regularly to see, well, okay, does this class really, you know, do the things that we are doing really meet their requirements, rather than the academic requirements, or rather than the social requirements of what people think the social design is. It's like, what does the class look like if we're teaching for different people? The same way where when my student of color, she came to me and she said, this is a class for extroverts. This class is, you know, she really talked about all of the issues of this type of class. And then I thought, okay, so how do I then teach the class for the students who generally classes are not designed for, right? I don't have to ask these questions when I'm in Trinidad or in Brazil. But in the US, I'm asking those questions. In Trinidad, I'm teaching a class for Trinidadian students. In the US, I'm trying to see, well, how can I bring this, to use, I can't think of another word at this moment, how can I bring the superpower of understanding how to teach for a non colonial or a non-Eurocentric gaze? How can I bring this to all of my classes? So the classes are not designed for the dominant narrative, even though the dominant group can consume these classes and can learn from the experience. It's a very long-winded response.
Well, yeah, actually, Marisol's comeback as well said in the chat, do not discard design knowledge, but do unhinge it and have it converse with the undesignable. In other words, that which resists representation. And well, right, that's, so that gives us a way forward. Do you want to, should we fish around a little more in the Q&A area, or do you want me to pull something?
Yeah, there's another question that is difficult. I may not be able to respond to it, but I'll bring it up, which is about pluriversal ways of documentation and communication, and that's a very important conversation. I, in fact, do use sticky notes and Miro, which the person responded to, put in the question, but I also think about different ways of documenting work, different ways of writing, because I'm a design researcher as well. So when we did our conference in June, we produced academic papers because that's what people expect to read. But the way that we produced the papers, the way that we selected the authors, the way that we produced the papers were, these ways of working were very different to, I guess, what I'll call a Euro-American tradition in research. So actually what we did is, in some cases, not all, some people sent us papers, but some people did not send us papers and had excellent knowledge that we wanted to share. So the first thing we did, we created videos. Then we downloaded the transcripts of the videos. Then we put student assistants to work on the transcripts and start turning these videos into papers. The student assistants did the formatting because, you know, even there was one person who had this fantastic paper and couldn't get the formatting together. And, you know, these are all of these kinds of barriers to knowledge, maybe from the global South. You know, there are mechanisms in academia that are automatic gatekeepers. And so because we were doing this work, this is me, Renata Marks-Leitão, and Laura Murphy from Tulane, because we were doing this work through this lens of pluriversality and decoloniality, let's say, we were just trying to say, well, okay, how can we make sure this knowledge is accessible? And let's just find a way of just getting rid of all of the barriers, you know? So in the end, we ended up producing the knowledge in a way that that academia wants to consume it, but our process was different. We even did a bit of co-writing, you know, and coaching, and, you know, so it, recently somebody wrote to me and asked, well, what was your rejection rate for that conference? And I had to think, wow, I can't even talk about the rejection rate because that's not the way we were working. The way that we were working was where we were thinking of how can we get this knowledge out to the public and just how can we support that process? So we may have rejected somebody or other, but I actually have to go back into the files. But, you know, if you're working with that kind of perspective of just how do we create new knowledge and how do we make sure multiple perspectives are respected and heard and whatnot, you'll create different ways of documenting work. Another long and rambly response.
Well, although the time is also like rushing by, we've probably only got about 10 minutes left to us. And I know that people are having to hop off to do other things and they're trying to say goodbye because they've loved the talk so much. I was wondering, you know, we're dealing with incredibly advanced concepts and possibilities for the future at one end. At the other end, of our audience, you know, we have people who are absolutely at the very beginning of their careers. And one of the things that's been fantastic about the talk is that it also engages them. It must be the sort of most broadband talk I've ever heard. But I just wanted to wondered if we could pick through the Q&A a bit and see if we can help orient people at the very beginning of their training and their careers. Because, yeah, I mean, you know, we're on the edge maybe of a sort of new way of doing things. So, for example, I'm not going to catch everything here, but for example, Lauren Hong writes, what is your advice for a starting designer who's uncertain what they want to do with their skills? Alison Walsh asks for students looking forward to opening work to the workforce. This is great. Where all of these juicy concepts land in terms of a job.
Okay.
And when you're and then when you're in the job, it's like, you know, wait, everybody, we're just addressing one segment of the world here.
Yes. Okay, so my response to that, I'm full of lots of crazy anecdotes because I've lived in so many different places, right? But when I was at university, my professor, Evans Fontora, he said that if you guys are looking for jobs after this course, you're not going to find any. And Simon, please don't be upset with me for saying that. But so I'll explain a little bit more what Professor Fontora was saying, because he continued. We were all very afraid when he said that. But he said that you have to learn to make yourself relevant. And that's what we needed those were some of the skills that we needed to acquire in university, right? And so we had to learn to make ourselves relevant so that we would never have to look for the job. It's kind of like that people would always need us because we became relevant, okay? And I embraced that kind of abstract thinking that he gave in school. And actually, I did not look for a job for the first 10 years of work. And of course, I worked in a different place. I worked in Trinidad. And I just left university with this kind of entrepreneurial spirit. And I knew how to convince people that they needed design and they needed me. But that said, I know that this might not be what the students want to hear, but this is about learning to think, and some of the technical skills and all of that, that technical ability that we learn, yes, it's important, but it's going to change. You know, like all of the software that I knew when I left school, all of that information is kind of maybe even obsolete, but what I do know is about how to think, how to listen, how to pay attention to details, how to propose creative solutions. And these are the skills that you're trying to get out of your design work. Again, I know it's very abstract for students, but yes, I think that's what they have to take away from this education.
Well, you know, from my, and I don't want to speak for all colleagues, of course, in this department, or for all students. I mean, students might be showing up in the department to acquire actual sort of technical skills. Mm-hmm. You know, we want to know how to code, and you know, we teach that. But it also sort of makes me think, like, as a design department, we're really sort of at the behest of the good people of California and the rest of the world. And we do have to figure out how to sort of serve multiple constituencies. And that's probably something more or less like public service at one end, mm-hmm. and enterprise and innovation at the other. And like you say, you know, that's kind of like a whole world. So maybe one thing we can do is to help people figure it out, like sort of find their bearings in a world that, you know, it's impossible to fully control or you know, and moreover, you know, we don't want to be doing that.
Yeah. Yes.
But it is about a certain sort of agility, I think. You know, if you look back
exactly.
at famous moments in design education, the Bauhaus on the one hand, you know, they were figuring out how to sort of bend metal. But it was also kind of like a training in how to think, well, what should designers be doing in the world? And we've moved past those answers, right? Mm. And now here we are again, trying to sort of do it again. Like
different questions. Well, same questions at a different time. Yes, yeah. Yes, yeah.
There was in fact a question about, you know, in the sort of the heat of class, and I'm forgetting where I've seen this, you know, you get to what it says, you know, 8 weeks is not nearly enough time to meet, address, solve the critical challenges students have.
No, it's not. And I think, you know, if I go back to your last question about needing to serve people in Silicon Valley, right? We need to do that, and we need those people, right? And it is our responsibility, let me get all heavy-handed now, our responsibility as educators to make then the people who are going out to do that work be more critically aware. So yes, they can go out and they can be the best tech people possible, but we want tech people who will ask harder questions, you know, and we want tech people who will see social justice and who will, you know, so it's not to ignore the tech skills, we need them, but we also want tech people who will ask those kinds of questions.
So we're sort of gravitating to thinking that pluriversal design is about, you know, sort of questioning and sensitivity and reflection on ourselves and positioning ourselves. So does this sort of begin to answer, there's a question that's been sitting there from Ivan. Is there a final goal to pluriversal design that we can fixate on? Or is it more of a moving one, even a different kind of thing?
I think of it as a moving goal. I don't think that we have a checklist that we could say, okay, we have reached, because we reached all of these 15 pluriversal design goals or something like that. But I think it is a process of, yes, learning to live in a system of plurality. You know, if we recognize that the systems around us are not places of plurality, and we ask ourselves, how can we make sure that we are living in this pluriversality, then yes, we're moving towards the goal, and the goal will continue to move.
We're down actually to our last few minutes here, Lesley-Ann. Yes. Did you want to take a spin through Q&A, or shall I pull something out for you?
You can pull something. I'm seeing Tom's question in front of me. You know, what's our role in helping students make themselves relevant? I looked at that question, and I'm not even sure I can answer it, but I know that we are answering it throughout the course, you know, so it is about them somehow being in conversation with society. We have to bring some of our design discussions outside of the classroom. And so that might be a way of making ourselves relevant, or learning to collaborate with people across different disciplines, being able to have conversations about design with people who say that they're not designers, even though they probably are. You know, that to me maybe is how we move towards being more relevant, you know, moving outside of our little colleges of design.
This might be the final question, but we'll see. And Jennifer Cross posted a couple of questions. Here's one that might be that you might be able to tackle. What specific advice could you give to large scientific groups that are interested and striving to break down the barriers to publication for global South scientists and authors? Scientists in other fields have no idea how to begin. And I think one reason I've wanted to pull this out is because so much of what you're talking about this morning, it's sort of epitomized in design, but it's something that I know we're struggling with in multiple fields. I know that I had a conversation recently with a colleague in computer science who is trying to persuade colleagues that computer science isn't like this sort of universal knowledge based, but that computer scientists have to position themselves in the field to ask, you know, what is the knowledge being produced and what's it trying to do? So I've pulled that out. Is there any specific advice for our colleagues trying to broach those barriers?
Well, I know I'll sound like a stuck record. I think one place I'd start is about collaboration. You know, like I collaborate with people in Brazil, and I mean, I've learned, I speak other languages, and so that makes it easy. But, you know, if you only work with people who speak English, or if there are some barriers to participation that are artificial. And so these other fields could figure out, okay, how do we somehow remove some of these barriers? And so language is one barrier, or just the fact that you, when you are a research in a small place, maybe you are just dealing with imposter syndrome or lack of resources, or, you know, so many other things that are affecting how you can participate in sharing the knowledge. It's not that you are not creating knowledge, it's that very often that knowledge is just staying in that place. And so maybe these organizations could figure out, how do we go there and find out what people are doing, and how do we partner, and how do we support people? You know, if I go back to our conference at Tulane, we spent a lot of time really supporting people to make sure that the work didn't just remain hidden. And so it takes a lot of work, but it's work that is useful because it's, there are a few people, I think Escobar and Santos and other people, particularly now with the pandemic, everyone is saying that you cannot solve problems like this chaos that we're in with old ways of thinking, and that this new knowledge and new ways of thinking is going to come from the global South. So that's why then people have to then move and, you know, really not just work with people from their own little pockets, but try to figure out, how do we collaborate with people in other places to get this work seen.
We have to wrap up. We've got a message from the Alberini family thanking us, thanking you, Dr. Noel, for a superb talk this morning. And, you know, I really kind of want to join that sentiment. It's been such a privilege to share in your knowledge and your life experiences. I know I have a lot of work to do on myself and my knowledge base. I'm a monoglot, you know, but I'm fired up. So I think everybody is wanting to thank you as best they can through the chat, and thank you, Lesley-Ann. And I think with that we wrap up for the morning.
Thank you. I enjoyed this.